Thank you everyone for joining. Sorry that I couldn't be there in person, and then I'm not presenting raptors to you. Hopefully this won't be a disappointment in comparison. My name is Grant Sizemore. I am the Director of Invasive Species Programs at American Bird Conservancy, where I work a lot on cat issues. Um, so that's what we're going to discuss today. What's going on with cats? And to boil it all down, we got too many cats for the number of homes that want them, and as a result, they roam the landscape willy-nilly and have a variety of harms caused to other animals, a bunch of risks to the cats themselves. And we need to do a better job about managing those cats and the consequences of those cats on the landscape to protect birds, but to also protect a whole bunch of other things. So we're going to explore some of the conservation and public health underpinnings of the ongoing cat overpopulation crisis. And I'll suggest some solutions that hopefully you can provide me some feedback on, and maybe we can get implemented in your neck of the woods. But I hope at the end of this you can all become advocates for American Bird Conservancy's Cats Indoors program. So with that, let's talk about this roadmap to coexistence. And I want to just start by introducing American Bird Conservancy. I think it's important to know, where your information is coming from, I guess. So American Bird Conservancy is a 501c3 nonprofit. We are dedicated to the conservation of native birds and their habitats throughout the Americas, really focusing on full life cycle conservation for birds. We have grown a lot in the last 30. We're in our 30th year right now. And have seen a lot of growth in our programs, in our outcomes for bird conservation, doing a lot of work. Well, I'll get into some of that work here in just a bit. But you probably have heard about the 3 billion bird study. This was a study published in 2019. It found that since 1970, so in the last 50 years roughly, we have experienced a net loss of 2.9 billion birds in the United States and Canada. That is pretty startling. And so that is informing a lot of the work that American Bird Conservancy and other partners are doing with regard to bird conservation. We are seeing dramatic declines in basically every single group of birds except wetland birds. They seem to be doing pretty well, but everything else is declining. You can see the relative change in the graph on the right, and wetland species are the only ones in the positive. Everything else is negative, and grassland birds in particular are doing very poorly. So there are a lot of reasons for these declines, and they're not the same for every single species, but there are generally declines for just about everything. So American Bird Conservancy, or ABC, is looking at a variety of strategies to implement to reduce these declines, to reverse them, and hopefully to build back better, healthy populations of our native birds throughout the Western Hemisphere. So some of our other programs are glass collisions. So glass collisions is a major source of bird mortality throughout the United States and Canada. So we have a program that focuses on solutions. You can see one of those solutions presented in the image on the top left. Decals that you can apply. There are also films you can apply, just things that make glass visible to birds. We have a great program in Hawaii to try and keep the remaining native Hawaiian forest birds from going extinct. That is our Birds Not Mosquitoes program, which is doing some great work to reduce the threat of avian malaria spread by non-native mosquitoes in Hawaii. We do a lot of habitat restoration and conservation, in particular for our golden-winged warbler projects up in the Midwest Great Lakes region of the United States. We also have programs dedicated to preventing plastic pollution, our SPLASH program, which would be particularly interesting to Cynthia and the Shorebird program. But all in all, we're, like I said, we're looking at a full life cycle analysis, full life cycle conservation. And getting back to that 3 billion birds study, there was a coalition that came together to conduct that study and then to provide solutions or strategies for reversing those declines. You can see all of those 7 simple actions that were identified. One of those is to keep cats indoors, which of course we're going to be talking about more. So there are a bunch of issues to consider when it comes to domestic cats, Felis catus. By the way, domestic cat is the common name for the species. So I don't, when I say domestic cat, I don't mean tame. It could be any level of tameness, stray, feral, tame, owned cat, whatever, it doesn't matter. It's the species, Felis catus, a domestic cat. There are a bunch of issues to consider. Predation is what we most commonly think of, certainly from the bird world, and it is worthwhile to think about. We're going to talk about it. But diseases, nuisance behaviors, human emotion and human behavior, and management, how we effectively manage domestic cats on the landscape. What are the policies we need to be considering to effectively reverse the harms that we're seeing and get the cats off the landscape, reverse that overpopulation crisis that I've mentioned. So with that in mind, if there's one thing I want to leave you with today, it is that domestic cats can make wonderful pets. I have one myself. I've had cats pretty much my entire life, but they cause significant harm to birds and other wildlife when they're out in the environment. And so we have to manage domestic cats. And so that's kind of the prevailing principle behind American Bird Conservancy's Cats Indoors program, which conducts education, outreach, advocacy associated with keeping pet cats indoors and effectively managing unowned cats on the landscape. So some of the science, cats as predators. So cats are instinctive predators. It's one of the reasons that they can be such an impactful predator and an introduced species in the environment is because they are actually instinctive predators. They will hunt and kill wildlife regardless of whether or not they have been fed. And I think this is evident to anybody who's ever played with a cat, with a ball of string or a feather toy. That cat is engaging in a predation response, a predatory response. That cat, it has no intention of consuming that ball of string or that feather toy, but it is attacking it, grabbing it with its claws, biting it, kicking it. All of these behaviors, though we consider them fun and engaging for our pet cat, when it goes outside, if it goes outside, it is lethal for birds and other animals. And domestic cats also have a distinct advantage over our native species, our wildlife, whether they be predators or prey, in that domestic cats are not limited by whether or not they are successful hunters. They have access to veterinary care. They have plenty of food. They have shelter. They've got clean water. All things that our native wildlife really do not have. And if a domestic cat, pet cat does not make a kill, it doesn't go hungry. It just goes home. So these are distinct advantages that wildlife do not have, and that places them in a place that would make them more likely to have a disproportionate impact as compared to, say, a native predator. So there have been plenty of studies that have looked at cats as predators on the landscape, and you can see some images on the left from what was called a kitty cam study published in 2013 out of University of Georgia. One of the interesting things that they found was not just that these owned indoor-outdoor cats with plenty of food and water and everything, that they killed wildlife, that was expected. It was that they only brought back to the house about 23% of all the prey that they killed. And so what that means is that for any previous studies or any cat owner who says, well, my cat only kills, maybe one bird a month, you really need to multiply that by 4 or 5 to get a true estimate of the total magnitude of cat-caused mortality in the environment. So I'll highlight one other study, which was Kays et al. 2020, which concluded that cats in the environment um, have 2 to 10 times the impact of a native predator because they're more effective in killing large numbers of wildlife, but they also exist at much higher densities than native predators in the environment. So all of this kind of comes to the conclusion that owned cats in particular, but also unowned cats, still kill wildlife regardless of whether or not they've been fed. And these cats have been introduced into environments around the world. They are related to the Near Eastern wildcat from North Africa, Middle East, domesticated about 10,000 years ago and have since been spread around the world. These are data points from islands around the world, but of course they're on every single continent as well, except for Antarctica. And the impact of cats in the environment as predators sometimes gets overlooked, or um, when we think about cats, we frequently think about them as individuals because we know them as individuals. We have pets that are cats, but we don't often think about birds or other wildlife as individuals. And I think that does a disservice to our wildlife and certainly to our conservation goals. So I really think this poster here from Wildlife Center of Virginia highlighting the faces of cat attacks is an interesting way to showcase the individuality of the animals that are attacked and potentially killed by cats roaming in the landscape. Um, you know, cats, I mentioned they have a disproportionate impact where they're roaming. One of the reasons they can have such a high impact is because they have bacteria in their mouths and they have these sharp puncturing teeth, unlike dogs. And so, they grab onto a bird or some other wildlife. That tooth punctures down through the tissues. It deposits saliva, which carries bacteria down into the tissues. And the result is, even if the cat doesn't directly kill it, frequently it will die as a result of infection. Data from wildlife rehab facilities across the country found that about 80% of all birds that were provided to wildlife rehab centers as a result of a cat attack actually ended up dying, even with veterinary treatment. And of course, that's just for a subset of those animals that would ever be attacked by cats. Most of them are not taken to a wildlife rehab facility. But even with veterinary care, 80% of them still die. That data also found that cats impacted about 300 species. So it's a wide variety of different species that can be impacted by cats. And we know from other data from around the world that cats will actually consume over 2,000 species. So they are opportunistic generalist predators, typically, that can have sizable impacts in the local environment. And I like this quote from Lloyd et al. That really highlights that this is preventable suffering of individual animals. Cats do not belong in the environment. They are not supposed to be there. And there are solutions we can implement, which we'll talk about, that can prevent this unnecessary mortality. So speaking about their disproportionate impact, the magnitude, if you add up the total individual cat-caused wildlife mortality in the United States, it reaches just an unfathomable number. 2.4 billion birds are estimated to be killed by domestic cats in the United States every single year. 2.4 billion birds, and it far surpasses all the other direct sources of human-caused bird mortality. We have to take action regarding domestic cats in the environment. Otherwise, all these other things we're doing, which are good and we should also be addressing, do not add up to the total impact that cats have in the environment. So that study made headlines in 2013 when it was released, the estimate of 2.4 billion birds in the United States. But I want to point out that it is consistent with other studies done around the world. All of the studies that have looked at various taxa in countries across the globe have found that cats kill hundreds of millions to billions of animals in those taxa every single year. So the global impact of domestic cats roaming the environment is massive, just massive. And of course, we've only got studies from a handful of countries. So all of these estimates combine then to result in population level impacts and species level impacts for some species. Um, a 2016 study found that cats have contributed to the extinction of 63 species of birds, mammals, and reptiles, and that's data from this image in the middle of the screen. BMR means birds, mammals, and reptiles. So 40 birds, 21 mammals, and 2 reptiles are extinct due, at least in part, to domestic cat predation. 430 species of threatened and endangered birds, mammals, and reptiles remain impacted by cats. They just have such a massive impact, and it can happen really quickly. One case study, I suppose, is from the Stevens Island wren or Lyle's wren in New Zealand, which in the about 1890-ish was unknown to Western science. A lighthouse keeper arrived there with his cat, or maybe a couple cats. That's a little unclear. But one day, his cat brought back in its mouth this bird. He sent it off for analysis. They said, "Oh, a new species. Congratulations!" And within 2 or 3 years, the species was extinct because of his cat killing all the birds. So even a single cat can have a big impact in the local environment. And it's as a result of this that domestic cats have been listed to be among the world's most harmful invasive species globally. So that kind of sums up cats as predators in the environment. Certainly the direct predation impacts. There are indirect predation impacts they have also in sort of the ecology of fear, changing behavior, competing with other native predators. But now I think we should move on to disease transmission, something that is a little more overlooked when it comes to domestic cats in the environment. And so here is a table of a variety of diseases that cats can carry, parasites and diseases that cats can carry and transmit to other species. Many of them are zoonotic, can be transmitted to people. And I'm going to talk about 2 of these in more detail, rabies and toxoplasmosis, but I do want to highlight avian flu is on this list also. And that is a growing concern. It's been in the news. Cats are certainly testing positive for avian flu, and there are I think widespread concerns about where this potential pathogen might end up, and if cats could then become a vector for it sort of mutating and becoming more virulent for people. Anyway, that aside, let's talk a little bit about rabies and toxoplasmosis. So we're going to start with rabies. So this is a map of the United States, as you can tell, that highlights the number of rabid cats. It's a heat map, essentially, of rabid cats in the United States from, I believe it's 2019 to 2022. 2017 to 2022. You can see that rabies in domestic cats is predominantly an eastern United States phenomenon. It tends to go along with the raccoon rabies virus variant. So raccoon rabies is the predominant type of rabies in the eastern United States, and certainly wildlife are more commonly infected with rabies than domestic animals, but among domestic animals, domestic cats are the #1 source of rabies in the United States. It's not even close, really. It's about 4-to-1 comparison between cats testing positive and dogs testing positive in the United States. And cats have surpassed dogs since the 1980s, in part due to dog control legislation that has not caught up yet in cats. Cats also pose a disproportionate exposure risk to rabies because, of course, we're far more familiar with cats than we are a raccoon or a skunk or whatever. And so people are far more likely to try to interact with an unknown cat than they are with a wild species of a raccoon or skunk. And so that can potentially pose an exposure risk, and particularly for kids. This is a strain on public health resources. I just want to add, we don't get too many cases of human rabies in the United States, but that's because we have such a robust um, public health surveillance system that is very reactive in providing post-exposure prophylaxis to any individual who may have been exposed to a rabid animal. But it comes with a cost. It comes with a cost to taxpayers. It comes with a cost to individuals who are exposed. And we want to maintain this robust system because once symptoms arise, you're dead. Almost 100% certainty that you will die once symptoms of rabies um, show up. So you don't you don't want that. Now in California, the situation is actually a little bit different. Again, it's separate from that hot spot in the eastern United States, but also the number of rabid cats to number of rabid dogs is about the same across years in California. Cats do lead the way between 1991 and 2020. The years for which I have data in this graph. There are 49 cats, 47 dogs total. Um, but together they make up 72% of all rabid domestic animals during this time. Uh, so there were two rabid cats in Ventura County, I believe, over the years. Nothing recently. The last one was in 1957, and we hope to keep it that way. But we need to be careful about the policies we implement and make sure that we're doing everything we can to prevent potential exposures. Rabies is moving westward. The raccoon rabies virus variant is moving westward. Government agencies are doing their best to try and prevent that westward spread, but it is still spreading, and we hope that it will not reach California, but if it does, it will certainly be problematic. So let's move on from rabies to talk about toxoplasmosis. Um, this is a really fascinating disease. I think it's caused by infection with the parasite Toxoplasma gondii. And so this is a parasite that relies on felines, including domestic cats, but not just domestic cats, relies on felines to complete its life cycle. It can only sexually reproduce in the gut of a feline. And so as you can see in this image on the right side of your screen, what happens is the parasite will reproduce in the gut of a cat, for example. It will then be excreted into the environment in cat feces in what are called oocysts. So tiny infectious eggs, basically. Those eggs or oocysts remain in the environment and remain infectious for months to years in freshwater, marine, or terrestrial environments. But they can then move through the environment, which I'll talk a little bit about in a minute, and infect a wide variety of species. They can infect basically any bird or mammal, any warm-blooded species. And then those animals can pass it along either through the food chain or through infection in utero, so passing it on to their fetus. So this is a serious public health risk. It's recognized to be among the top 5 neglected parasitic diseases in the United States by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. It has a wide variety of impacts in people and wildlife and domestic animals. But we know the most about studies in people. It can impact memory. It can cause fetal abnormalities, miscarriages, fetal deformities, intellectual disabilities. It can cause blindness. It can cause organ failure. It can cause death. It's a serious, especially for those with compromised immune systems like HIV or AIDS. It is a serious risk. And once you get it, you got it. You don't get rid of it. In a normal, healthy adult, it can be as little as flu-like symptoms, and then you may not know you have it for the rest of your life. But it can have really long-lasting and permanent impacts as well. So There are about 1 million infected individuals in the United States annually. And, blindness, I mentioned, ocular toxoplasmosis is sort of well known in the ophthalmological realm. There are about 3,000 cases of ocular toxoplasmosis annually in the United States. So I mentioned it can last in the environment for months to years, and it can move through the environment. There was actually some really good work on this in California, been a bunch of studies in California that have looked at the movement and deposition of Toxoplasma gondii into the environment. And in this graph, or whatever, image on the right, you can see that what the researchers did in this case was they looked at Toxoplasma prevalence among felines in the terrestrial environment. So in mountain lions and bobcats and domestic cats. And they observed it moving through the watershed. So you get these rainfall events, the contaminated feces moves through the watershed. The oocysts remain even after the feces degrades. It moves through the watershed into eventually the nearshore marine environment where it was accumulating on biofilm on kelp, then infecting or let's not infecting, but being further accumulated in marine snails and other bivalves. And then southern sea otters were consuming those animals, ingesting the oocysts, becoming sick and dying, actually, many of them as a result. It also changed their behavior, made them more likely to be killed by sharks, the research found. So it does change risk perception in people and other animals. Presumably, that's the mechanism for the change in shark predation on sea otters. There are also, like I said, changes in people and their risk behavior. It's been referred to as the road rage parasite at times. There are a bunch of weird things it can do. It's also associated with neurodegenerative diseases like schizophrenia and obsessive compulsive disorder. But anyway, this disease is not only spread, or this parasite is not only spread through ingestion of these oocysts. And so the what people will say is, well, just don't eat cat feces, don't get near cat feces. I think as we've shown with how it moves through the watershed, that's not really true. And also it can infect livestock animals, and then it will infect the tissues that we would ultimately consume, and has been identified as the second leading cause of death among foodborne illnesses in the United States after salmonella. So it's a problem. Toxoplasma gondii, toxoplasmosis is a problem. It can even contaminate produce. So this would be from, domestic cats roaming or other wild felids roaming in areas where produce is being grown. One study in Virginia found that both organic and conventional produce from retail grocery stores and from farmers markets were contaminated. Not all of them, not every sample, but there were samples that tested positive in all of those environments for Toxoplasma gondii oocysts. So we need to do a better job about biosecurity, where we are producing our food, whether that be animal or vegetable or fruit. Because we do not want to risk Toxoplasma gondii ingestion and toxoplasmosis. So the takeaway here, at least for now, is make sure you wash your fruits and vegetables before you consume them. And please do cook your meat all the way through so that if it does house any Toxoplasma gondii parasites, that you would actually kill them. All right. One more point I guess I'll make about environmental contamination from birds. Even pelagic seabirds have been found to be infected by Toxoplasma gondii because the oocysts can actually move among ocean currents. And so there were birds that were identified in an island, no domestic cats or other felines on that island, but they found that due to ocean currents, oocysts were being ingested by those seabirds, and they were having health outcomes, bad health outcomes. So we've talked about rabies and toxoplasmosis. I also want to just give a brief mention of typhus. It's not necessarily a national concern with regard to domestic cats, but it is a problem in California. And Orange County Vector Control has put out warnings about typhus for years. And that has been specifically associated with domestic cats. There's actually incidents of typhus transmitted by fleas on domestic cats at Disneyland, where Orange County Vector Control reached out to Disneyland to warn them about cats being maintained on their property. And there was at least one human case of typhus as a result of exposure from those cats. The symptoms of typhus can be fever, chills, aches, nausea, stomach pain, coughing, rash. It's not usually severe, but the CDC does recommend that you do not feed or pet stray animals, including cats. So what are the management alternatives? We've heard kind of a little bit about what are the problems of cats, the consequences of cats roaming the environment as predators and as potential transmission pathways for diseases. What do we do about it? So there are a few different options we can consider. One, don't do anything. Which hopefully I've convinced you is not a reasonable outcome at this point. Two, we can reduce harms by responsible cat ownership. And three, reduce harms through other population control measures. And so we're going to talk a little bit about these. So responsible cat ownership, it really boils down to treating cats like we treat dogs. We need to do a better job of requiring sterilization, permanent identification like microchips. We need to vaccinate our pet cats, and we need to keep them under an individual's, under a person's control. Maybe that is on a leash. Maybe it's in a catio, which is like a screened-in patio, basically for cats, a cat patio or catio. Maybe it's in a stroller like Louie in this middle picture here. Whatever the case is, just not roaming the environment. Please just keep it on your property if that's all you can do. Just don't let it roam the environment. That's where it contributes more to these landscape level problems. It is exposed to a variety of risks. And these recommendations are in line with the American Veterinary Medical Association's recommendations for owned cats. Also, they say that because it is safer for cats, for native wildlife, for human communities, for the environment, please keep cats under a person's control, either in the house or otherwise safely contained. And I do want to point out there is a serious risk to your cat from a variety of potential pathways. Vehicle strikes, poison, coyotes are a big one, especially in California. There's been some good research that has looked at interactions between coyotes in California. One study in 2022 found that they used basically the same areas, and it led to what they called, quote, high percentage of cat depredation events in that location. So that was in Culver City, California. Another study found that 29% of coyote scats in small urban fragments contained domestic cats. That was in San Diego and Orange County. And a 2020 study found that there were, quote, high cat densities and supplemental feeding of cats that attracted coyotes. That supplemental feeding, I think, is important. So some individuals will go out and try and feed cats outdoors, whether it's an owned cat, their pet cat, or other cats, stray feral cats that might be in the environment. And what that study found was that actually was an attractant to coyotes. Coyotes would not only want to eat the food that was put out, but they'd want to eat the cats there too. So population reduction beyond just pet cats, beyond just keeping your pet cat indoors, really revolves around this idea that births and immigration, the number of cats coming into a population, must be lower than deaths and emigration, or the number of cats leaving that population. That's the only way you can get population reduction. And here are some of the ways that that reduction has been suggested for cats over the years. I think what we really want to focus on, though, is, what do these outcomes actually benefit birds? Do they benefit cats? Do they benefit other wildlife? Are those cats still roaming in the environment? And if they are, they're still contributing to many of those harms that we've already talked about, to many of those risks that cats still face. It's only when those cats are removed from the environment that they themselves are potentially kept safe, but certainly that wildlife, that human communities are kept safe, and that nuisances and other problems are avoided in the environment. Now, I talked in the beginning about human emotion and behavior being a big component of this. And I want to touch on some research that American Bird Conservancy has conducted in the last couple of years, looking at public attitudes. And this is specifically regarding attitudes for pet cat management in California. And so the questions that we were asking people to rate, their level of agreement with these various interventions regarding pet cats. And so one would be, vaccinating your cat. I, strongly disagree to strongly agree that pet cats should be vaccinated for rabies. Strongly disagree to strongly agree that cats should be licensed. Same for permanent identification, for microchips, same for sterilization, same for containment, and treatment under the law was worded as, I strongly disagree to strongly agree that cats should be treated equally to dogs under the law. And so the results were interesting. We found that vaccination was far and away the most supported cat management strategy, with nearly 90% of respondents saying that they agreed with that, followed by sterilization, treatment, equal treatment under the law to dogs, microchipping, keeping cats inside the house or otherwise contained, and licensing. And I think, this is interesting from a policy perspective. Statewide, microchipping is required, but none of the other interventions here are required across the state. So certainly our data indicates there are other interventions that are more popular, but have not yet been instituted statewide. We also broke this down by cat owners and individuals who did not have a cat. And what we found was that microchipping, sterilization, and equal treatment under the law were more popular than among cat owners than among non-cat owners, and that there was actually greater disagreement for licensing and containment as opposed to non-cat owners. So it helps to inform how we might go about talking with cat owners and the general public about these various responsible cat ownership behaviors, and where we have some work to do to try and build support. The only one of these that was more popular with non-pet owners, by the way, was licensing. It's interesting, though, that when asked about a mandatory license, 57.9% of cat owners agreed, which was actually higher than what they mentioned in their just general attitude about licensing. Non-owners also supported it slightly more at 65%. When asked about mandatory vaccination, cat owners and non-owners both supported it at about 87%. We also asked about residents' beliefs about outdoor cats, and I think the takeaway message here is that injuries to the cat, disease risks to the cat, are probably the most persuasive messages that you can use in targeted communications about issues regarding cats roaming outdoors. So anyway, this is some research we're doing to try and understand the emotions, the beliefs, the behaviors of people in California in this case, but across the country, to understand how we can more effectively discuss these issues. So I'm going to move on to sort of the policy and management perspective here. And I just want to point out in California State Code where a lot of this exists. And we're not going to go through, all this in any great detail. I do just kind of want to point out it really, California State Code kind of boils down to animal cruelty issues, regarding cat management. Abandonment. Um, they have a prohibition on adoptable or treatable animals being euthanized, or they say state policy is that they should not be. I don't know if that quite is equivalent to a prohibition. Um, Licensing is authorized but not required. Sterilization is only required for cats that are adopted from an animal shelter, not for any other cat. And they do have a reduced hold period for feral cats, which is problematic, potentially, depending on how it's implemented. And I want to say that, these policy suggestions can have, oh, interesting. There we go. Can have an impact when they are implemented. This is data from California, from LA County, when it's before and after the adoption of a mandate for cat licensing. And the cat licensing is tied to a current rabies vaccination. So there was quite a bit of rabies in LA County prior to the adoption of this licensing requirement. But you can see from this data that it took a few years, but it did decline and never rebounded, basically. So implementing these types of strategies can have long-term benefits for public health, and making sure that cats and all other animals are protected. In Ventura County, I believe sterilization is required, but there's no rabies vaccination requirement. There's no license requirement. So, there are some opportunities perhaps for some positive change locally. And again, I think this boils down to treating cats like we treat dogs, whether it's an owned cat or an unowned cat. For unowned cats, we should really prioritize getting them off the landscape. That means trapping them and either placing them up for adoption in a long-term holding facility like an animal shelter or a sanctuary, or euthanizing them, but never ever re-abandoning those cats back into the environment. It's not safe for wildlife, certainly. It is not a good public health outcome, and it's actually not great for the cats either. They do not live wonderful lives as stray, feral, abandoned animals in the environment. There is one case study I want to point you to, that from Oak Harbor, Ohio, where a bunch of birders got together and they decided to change their local ordinance regarding cat management. And this is what they came up with. This was passed in 2018 or 2019, I believe. It prohibited feeding of outdoor cats. It prohibited nuisance behaviors like, pooping or peeing on somebody else's property. And it prohibited cats from running at large. That means being off their owner's property and not on a leash or otherwise under an owner's direct control. So no running at large. These are consistent with ordinances that are already in place around the country with dogs. It could be as easy as going into your local ordinances and adding "and cats" wherever you have laws regarding dogs. So American Bird Conservancy has a bunch of resources available on our website through our Cats Indoors program to help educate the public and cat owners, and really help you advocate for responsible cat ownership solutions in your part of the world. We have a pledge to keep cats indoors. We have a model ordinance that you can follow to implement in your community. Lots of videos and brochures, and the Bird City Network is another option for identifying and implementing these bird safe solutions regarding cat management. There is, through the certification process of Bird City, there are electives for cat management that you can select. And all of this is also consistent with the idea of One Health, which has really grown in awareness, I guess, since the COVID outbreak. But it's the idea that basically human health, animal health, whether it's domestic animal or wildlife, environmental health are all interrelated. And if we can help build healthy populations among one group, it will benefit other groups as well. So this domestic cat management that I'm talking about is consistent with a One Health framework. It builds healthy environments, public health outcomes, domestic animal health outcomes. We cannot focus management of cats to exclusively be on live outcomes for individual domestic cats. That is not appropriate or responsible cat management strategy or policy. It's certainly not consistent with One Health. And again, I just want to highlight what some of these environmental risks associated. One Health is typically thought of as a sort of zoonotic disease concern, and it largely is, but there are other, healthy populations of wildlife are also sort of considered. But from that zoonotic disease risk perspective, there has been a lot of work on domestic cats. And this is a series of studies from Virginia that found lots of little zoonotic parasites being transmitted in cat feces from stray and feral cat colonies that were purposely being maintained on the landscape by individuals feeding them. And these were recognized by the researchers as serious public health risks. They found in one study that 82% of the cats that were trapped in that program were within roaming distance of public elementary or preschool grounds, public parks, or community gardens. These are places where you're much more likely to get exposure to high-risk individuals with compromised immune systems. You get kids who are playing in sand pits who are, shoving their fingers in their mouths. We should recognize these disease and parasite exposure risk pathways and minimize them to every extent possible. It is good public health policy. So, what can you do? Well, we at American Bird Conservancy are trying to build a movement for cats indoors. We hope you will join us. There are a bunch of different ways you can be involved. You can just educate those you come in contact with, your network, share some outreach materials, ABCs or others. You can become an advocate, an informed advocate in your community, advocating for, again, I said it could be as simple as adding "and cats" wherever you have dog control laws in your community. You can be active with your local legislators, sign action alerts. You can monitor state and local policies. You can get connected with Bird City type programs and help build these sort of certifications that are part of programs. So you make it more of a systemic incentive to have a cats indoors mentality. And then you can, make connections. Again, build that network and be a model, really. It's one of the most important things. Be a model of responsible cat ownership. If you don't have a cat, that's fine. But if you do, please keep it indoors. Keep it on a leash. Do not let it roam the environment. It is very harmful from all the information I've provided. Please don't do that. Be a model for your community in responsible cat ownership. I'm going to wrap it up there. Thank you very much for your attention, for the opportunity to speak with you today. I would be more than happy to hang out and take any questions that you might have.
All right. Well, thank you, Grant. So Cynthia is monitoring the chat. If you guys have any questions, please raise your hand and I'll ask you to unmute, or you can type it in the chat. I will say, as an owner or as a parent of two cats, we started our cat journey with indoor-outdoor cats, and we always tried to keep them within us. And I think an anecdote I'll tell you is I spent, due to injuries in fights or other predicaments, we probably spent $3,000 to $4,000 on vet bills just to treat injuries.
Yeah.
The two cats we decided to adopt this time, we decided to keep them indoors, and we did a lot of research. And part of the research was to understanding what they do in their hunts kind of modes. And we learned that cats are three-dimensional. They like to climb and like to jump up. So we put some cat furniture in the house, some shelving and some ropes and things they can play with. And then Cynthia, who's the real cat person in the family. And if you look at her picture, we decided to go ahead and enclose our patio. So we now have a catio.
That's great.
And I know a friend of ours that I bird with as well, when she bought her house, she came over and wanted to look at our catio to be inspired um, to make her own. They're pretty easy. It's as simple as enclosing your back deck with a screen. It doesn't have to be too crazy. We did ours to put some furniture in it so we can be with our cats outside. And it's really fun. They enjoy it. They beg to go out in the morning and then they come in. And it also allows us to put them somewhere where they're safe. If we wanted to open the door and, air out the house or whatever, they're not at risk to leave. So for us personally, it's been a definite success story. And yeah, we're all about cats indoors.
Yeah,
And then
I see Liz's hand. I just want to say, yeah, I've had the same experience. I grew up with indoor outdoor cats when I was young, and we had this same experience with vet bills. And I remember hearing cat fights in the night with our cat roaming around and our cat killing stuff, and it had a reduced lifespan. It ended up getting, the one I'm thinking about, got run over by a car, and it was after that that we decided, we need to keep our cats indoors, and have done so, not just for cat safety these days. It's also for birds and other wildlife. But um, it is a one thing you mentioned is you have to provide those vertical spaces for cats. I think what gets lost with cats sometimes is that they are considered pets you can ignore, and that's really not the case. You do need to play with them, provide them some enrichment. Vertical climbing areas, great. High quality pet food, um, regular care and attention. Basically, it's a pet.
Liz, go ahead and unmute yourself.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. Okay, one major thing that I was floored by is the talking about these parasites and how horrid it is and what they've already done and are doing. Um, isn't there a way that we could make more public information? I mean, this is a public health concern. And you said something, maybe I was not listening attentively enough, but I thought you said a million, you know, things, species, all the different species were killed from this stuff. And it continues. I mean, I think every vet must do a test for this fecal matter and to see if this is in a cat. We have control of a cat that goes into a vet, and then the vet could see, and then you could have a better idea of what's happening in your community. And the idea that this stuff lasts, you said up to a year. I mean, I was scared to death. I was like, oh my God.
Thanks for that, Liz. Yeah, I don't intend to scare with the information that I'm providing. I just want to inform. Regarding pet cats, so this will perhaps limit the scaring a little bit. Your pet cat, if it doesn't go outside, if it eats um, manufactured foods, kibble, whatever, not raw foods, it is very unlikely to transmit Toxoplasma gondii throughout its lifetime, to ever contract it. They're not born with it unless they get it from their mother in utero. So, like my pet cat, very low likelihood because she eats kibble, she eats wet food that's manufactured. She's not eating raw food, um, and she doesn't go outside. More than like on the deck with me, um, on a leash. So there is no possibility, well, not zero, but it's low likelihood that she's going to get Toxoplasma gondii and then excrete it in her feces. So if your cat is not roaming outdoors, not coming into contact with wildlife, um, it's a pretty low risk. And so I think vets they don't do it for a few reasons. One, it doesn't bother the cat, so it's not really a cat health issue, typically. It is fairly low likelihood if you are keeping your cat indoors. Two, once you get it as a person, you got it. And there's not a vaccine. There's no prevention other than the behavioral one, which they should already be advising you to do, which is keep your cat indoors. I said 1 million people are getting it annually. That's the estimate of toxo. Um, and it can be, again, as little as flu-like symptoms, and then you don't ever know you have it for the rest of your life. Now, you may have it and it may be impacting you. You're just not aware of it, like those subtle behavioral changes that I mentioned, memory loss, for example. But it's not going to kill you immediately, most likely. I can't say ever, but it's likely not going to kill you immediately. And it does take a few days for that cat feces to become infectious in the environment. So if you're changing your litter box, even if your cat has it, if you're changing your litter box every other day, again, very low risk.
So I'm going to pop in. We've got a comment in the chat. Why can screening, I think this is for toxoplasmosis, be part of the adoption process?
Can screening for toxo be part of the adoption process? Yeah, sure. But shelters, I'm not aware of any shelter doing it.
Yeah, I've adopted a lot of cats, and there's viruses that they screen for that are infectious, amongst the cat community. I just, don't know that toxo has ever been tested in that kind. You could always ask. I think it's a good question.
Yeah, I've asked when I've taken my cat in a few times, and I've asked at my primary doctor about it a little bit, and it's not a regular test that is run. You can get your blood tested for it. It'll cost you out of pocket probably, unless you have symptoms, unless you legitimately think you might have toxo. And again, because it doesn't typically impact the health of the cat, I think don't really consider it worth it.
We just got another question on the topic of toxoplasmosis. How long has it been an issue?
I mean, forever. It evolved along with felines. It probably evolved in South America and then has been spread around the world since then. But we've only known about toxo. I mean, it's only really been described well, I would say epidemiologically in the last 30, 40 years, largely due to one person in the U.S. Department of Agriculture. And agriculture, USDA is interested in it because it can be of concern for livestock. So they're monitoring for pigs and cows and everything, to see what the prevalence is and if it's a human exposure risk. And it can be. It can be. We need to do well with our biosecurity. Barn cats are not a great option for this reason and for other reasons, but for this reason also.
Yeah, and there's another question, and this is actually, I think this is a good question. What about all that kitty litter that goes to the dump?
Yeah, there was one good study, again, out of California, I think researchers at UC Davis, which tried to estimate how much feces a cat put out daily and then all the cats together annually. And I'm not going to try to quote the stat because I haven't looked at it in a long time, but anyway, it's irrelevant. So they did recommend at the end, please do not flush cat litter down the toilet. I guess there are some that you can. Just because you can doesn't mean you should. Don't do it. And please don't just chuck it out in the woods or whatever in the local park. Just, put it in a bag, put it in a landfill, the normal trash process. What about it sitting in a landfill? I don't know. I mean, it depends on the type of landfill that you have. A lot of them, I think, modern landfills, we're really delving outside my area of expertise here. But I think the trash is typically contained because they're trying to prevent noxious runoff, not just from toxo, but from, I don't know, lead or mercury or, other contaminants.
I
Right.
seem to remember, and you might have mentioned this in your talk. I don't remember hearing it, but there was a period of time where sea otters, ocean otters, were getting toxoplasmosis, and I think at one point there was a big new thing with kitty litter where it's you could flush it, and it's like you don't have to dispose it, and it's easy to get rid of. You just and so it was a thing for a while, and that resulted in otters from being sickened by toxoplasmosis.
Yeah, it is definitely a problem for southern sea otters. It's a problem for a lot of marine mammals, actually. The more we've looked, the more we found. We being not me, but the research community. Um, one place that where toxo is found, and I think is a good example of the role that cats play, in particular domestic cats, is in Hawaii. And because there are no other felines, in California you have mountain lions, you got bobcats. So it's plausible that the toxo could come from them, and some of it certainly does. A lot of it comes from domestic cats. Um, but in Hawaii, there's only domestic cats. So if there is toxo, it's coming from cats, from domestic cats. And it's there. And surprise, surprise, it's contaminating the whole landscape because there are a lot of cats in Hawaii. It's moving through watersheds, and it's actually the top disease threat for Hawaiian monk seals, which are endangered. There are about 300 of them left in the main Hawaiian Islands. And NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, which is responsible for managing those monk seals, is very concerned and is finding monk seals, washed up dead as a result of infection from this cat parasite.
So I had a question on is it the Oak Harbor ordinance? And it's kind of in general. Have there been studies regarding when these ordinances are enacted that there is less uh, feline mortality, that there is a better environment as far as obviously the rabies ordinance in LA was a good graph. I guess as we go forward advocating, you know, for responsible ownership of pets, which is kind of what you're advocating, you get into the emotional, well, my my cutie doesn't kill birdies. We
Yeah.
get this on the beach. My dog isn't a threat to birdies. My
Yeah.
dog likes birdies. No, actually, birdies don't like your dog. Heather, is there anything that we can take when we speak to our city leaders or county leaders to say, listen, here's the data, here's what this can help us solve?
I wish there was better data. There's
Oops, stop. I messed up. Oh, I'm all do.
There we go. I
Sorry,
wish
my bad.
no, it's all right. Sorry. I wish there was better data. There's not for a variety of reasons. Um, there's one study that I cite regarding microchips, which found like a 200% increase in the recovery rate for cats that were microchipped as opposed to those that were not. And I think, the mechanism for that is pretty obvious. Um, it, a microchip is wonderful because it's permanent. Cats tend to wear breakaway collars, and if they get out or are allowed out, they can become lost or taken by somebody or whatever the case may be. If they make their way to an animal shelter or a veterinarian, they can potentially scan it to see if there's a registered owner for that microchip that is inserted just under the skin of the cat. And then they can let that person know and say, hey, come pick your cat up. So obviously it's an easy way and a relatively inexpensive way to provide a safety net for your cat should it ever become lost.
All right, are there any other questions? If not, Um,
I had one crazy thing
oh,
since we
please.
had some interest in toxo. I don't think I mentioned this. Um, this might be more scare tactic. I don't mean it that way. I think it's really fascinating. But it's actually a mind control parasite. It's a little zombie control parasite, which has been it was worked out in rodents. And so what they found was that rodents who were infected with toxo were more likely to choose to spend time in an area inhabited by a cat. Um, as opposed to those who were not infected with it. And they found it like stimulated them. They were attracted to it. And the idea is that it then increases the likelihood of interaction between that rodent and the cat, thus increasing the likelihood of that cat eating that rodent and the chance for that parasite to make it back into a feline to complete its life cycle. Um, so that has all kinds of implications for human and other animal infections also. Um,
I'm smelling a Netflix series right there.
Yeah, it sometimes is referred to the crazy cat lady disease because of that zombie parasite aspect. I have never seen I've never seen anybody study that, any data to suggest that it is or isn't the case. So yeah, don't quote me on that. I'm not saying it is the crazy cat lady disease, but it is certainly super interesting. I find toxo very, very fascinating.
All right. Well, I think there's no other questions. We're going to leave it. For those of you still on, we have recorded this. I'm going to stop the recording now.